Very good. Just been shown that the on-air light is on. Welcome, everyone, to our regular meeting of Lacombe City Council for Monday, March 25th. It is 5:30 p.m. and I will call the meeting to order. And while you review the agendas, I wanted to start off with a public announcement. I received a letter from the Canadian Association of Municipal Administrators, CAMA, I believe it was last week, sharing some information here that, quite frankly, I had forgotten about. And I'm not going to read the whole letter, but it's addressed to myself regarding our Chief Administrative Officer. This year, it's our privilege to acknowledge that the commitment of your Chief Administrative Officer, Matt Gowdy, for his remarkable 15 years of service in municipal government management roles. So obviously a big milestone. Matthew, we appreciate your service. And more importantly, look forward to 15 more years of service. Thank you. Did anybody have any consent agenda items to be looked at? Councillor Hoekstra.
Thanks, Mayor Creasy. I move that we accept the consent agenda as presented.
Thank you. One more time. Anybody have anything to be removed from the consent agenda? Very good. Please go ahead and vote. And while that's tabulating, you can look over the full agenda. I expect that will be all green, and it is passed unanimously. I should also mention that Councillor Dallas is joining us remotely this evening. And just to make sure, if he can hear us now, perhaps Councillor Dallas, if you could just chime in just to make sure that the audio is working properly as he struggles for his.
Hi there, can you hear me?
We certainly can, thank you.
Excellent, thank you.
Very good. And then the overall agenda, Chief Administrative Officer Gowdy.
I'd like to propose for council's consideration an additional item 6.4, which is just an update on matters related to the postponement of the public hearing. And if we could consider having that item before 6 o'clock, before the planned public hearing for that item.
So 6.4 under request for decision. Very good. And Councillor Gullickson.
Thank you, Mayor Creasy. I'll move that we accept the agenda as amended.
Thank you. And because we've got some ongoing considerations for changes to our operations in council, item 6.4, it is under request for decision. However, in this instance, because it has to do with an item on the agenda already, I don't think that I'm actually going to put that to a vote. So I'm going to go ahead and leave that on 6.4. Were you aware of that when you made the motion?
Yeah, I thought it was just information that he was bringing forward, correct?
It is. It's under request for decision, however, 6.4.
Oh,
so
yes, I was aware of that.
Just wanted to make sure everybody's on the same page. Very good. Anyone else? So for the regular agenda, please go ahead and vote. That is unanimously in favor as well. So we cannot start public hearings prior to 6 p.m. So let's move on to request for decision, section 6. is there a preference that, I mean, we do have a half an hour or so anyway, but is there a preference to have the update discussed now? Would be preferable, CEO Gotti?
Now or anytime before 6
Okay.
will work for us.
I expect it's not a lengthy item, so why don't we just go ahead and just deal with that first?
Okay, Director Thompson's going to provide that up.
Thank you.
Good evening, council. I am in an undesirable position to request a motion from council to postpone and reschedule the public hearing planned today for bylaw 400.51. That is the consideration of the addition of residential units to the airport. The city was advised on Thursday, March 21st, that the public hearing notice was not published in the newspaper for 2 consecutive weeks, has been the city's typical practice for scheduled public hearings. As a precautionary measure, I requested that the agenda item be pulled from tonight's meeting and the applicant be advised that the public hearing will be postponed. However, I have further reviewed the city's legal requirements and policy for public advertising public hearings and found that the city's legislative obligations for advertising this public hearing have been met by direct mailing notices to those within 60 meters of the property per our policy, and by posting the public hearing notice on the city's website. Although publishing the notice in the newspaper has been a long-standing practice in Lacombe, it goes above the minimum legal requirement and is not strictly required. Even though this public hearing could have proceeded, the fact that the applicant was told to expect postponement and the agenda was published indicating the bylaw was postponed, my recommended course of action is to formally postpone and re-advertise the public hearing. If approved, new letters will be mailed and a notice will be placed on the city's website. On future public hearings, administration will continue to advertise public notices in the local newspaper. However, in the event that the public hearing notice is not published, the public hearing will continue as scheduled insofar as the city's legislative requirements are met. I apologize to council and the general public and the applicant for the confusion this has caused. So tonight, I am asking council to make the following motion: that council postpone the public hearing for bylaw 400.51 from March 25th, 2024, and schedule it for Monday, April 8th, 2024 at 6 p.m.
Thank you, Director Thompson. So an unfortunate error, but an error nonetheless. I appreciate the reasoning behind it. In this particular instance, I do not feel as though it's tremendously impactful, given that we have full opportunity to re-advertise and ensure that citizens are welcome to come down and voice their concerns on that item, bylaw 400.51. However, certainly interested in hearing from other council members as well. Councillor Hibbs.
Thank you, Mayor Creasy. Given that I don't have the wording in front of me, I would accept what was read out. So I would move that we would postpone the public hearing to April 8th, 2024.
Thank you. And just to be clear, on our screens here, I cannot see Councillor Dallas, so I have no idea if he's motioning for to speak or anything. So if we could maybe just clarify how he is to chime in if he so desires, because I don't think that his audio will work all of the time. Or does. Okay, so he will Teams the our legislative coordinator and go through that way. Very good. And does he have any input at this point in time? Very good. Thank you. Just wanted to make sure that you weren't lost in Electronicville. Councillor Dallas, thank you. Any questions or concerns with the motion before us? Councillor Ross.
Thank you, Mayor Creasy. No questions about the motion. I guess the question I'm concerned about citizen is the distance of notification, and it's not pertaining to this specific one. 60 meters, is that a standard under the MGA, or is that a standard set in the past? I've had, I guess, requests of some citizens as that being broader, but I just wonder if that, just so I can reply to this individual, is that a specific set amount under the MGA, or how is that distance set?
It is set either by the MGA or the Subdivision and Development Regulation of Alberta. I'm not sure. Oh, yeah. So it's set by our own land use bylaw, but it is in alignment with the requirements of either the Municipal Government Act or the Subdivision Development Regulation of Alberta. So it's a standard province-wide.
And I think we also need to consider that that is direct contact with those properties within the 60-meter radius. However, it is also advertised so that anyone in the community can be made well aware of it as well.
That's right. It is advertised both on the website, 2 weeks in the paper on normal, well, on this one as well, it will be, to make sure that everybody is aware. But 60 meters, I think, has been determined to be kind of the general area where a land use impact can be felt. That beyond that, it's kind of a diffused impact.
Thank you. Coordinator Bellabono, just I'll ask that you just read the motion back to us.
Mayor Creasy and Council, the motion on the floor by Councillor Hibbs is that Council postpone the public hearing for bylaw 400.51 from March 25th, 2024 and schedule it for Monday, April 8th, 2024 at 6 p.m.
Thank you for clarifying that and allowing some extra time for IT to input that into our machines. I think we're ready, unless there are questions from council. We can please go ahead and vote. So as expected, that is unanimously in favor as well. And once again, one of those unfortunate things, errors do happen. Thankfully for us, it's not very often, but I think that none of the circumstances, this is a positive outcome, and we'll look forward to that being brought forward at the start of April, April 8th rather. And we've got 15. Why don't we go to, let's see. Do we have Planner? Oh, she's here in person yet. Planner McLaughlin, are you prepared to put forth item 6.2 to us yet, or would you prefer a little more time? Very good. My apologies. I was reading off I got my bylaw numbers here confused. My apologies. That one cannot go ahead yet anyway. Exactly. And Manager McKinnon, I've got down here for item 6.3, bylaw 534, taxable dormitories, put forward for second reading. CAO Gowdy.
Yes, thank you. I'm stepping in for Senior Manager McKinnon as she's unable to be here this evening. So bylaw 514 is a taxable dormitory bylaw. It has been a longstanding tradition, as far as I can tell, going back as far as I've been able to research, that the town of Lacombe and city of Lacombe have applied tax levies to the dormitories within the municipality. Basically, the Municipal Government Act and the matters relating to taxation regulation of Alberta, as a default, actually exempt dormitories from taxation as kind of an educational purpose. But there is a clause that says, however, if a municipality has a bylaw allowing taxation, then dormitories are taxable. And so we are making sure that bylaw is in place and up to date with the passing or proposed passing of bylaw 514. Without this bylaw, it is about $60,000 of taxes that, again, have, at least for the entire time that the city of Lacombe has been a city, and a decade before that at least, have been taxed. And the Berman University, of course, is the one here that would be subject to taxation. They're well aware of the tax bill owing for it for their dormitories. However, we are awaiting some legal opinion. And so rather than pass second and third reading this evening, as I had originally proposed in my memo, I am proposing that you would proceed with second reading only this evening.
Very good. Well, thank you. We'll see if there's any appetite for that. Councillor Gluckson.
Thank you, Mayor Creasy. I'll move that council gives second reading to bylaw 514.
Thank you. Any comments or questions? Very good. And just to be sure, Councillor Dallas does not have any either. Very good. Seeing none, please go ahead and vote. And that is passed unanimously as well. For second reading of bylaw 514. And for the reasons stated earlier, I accept that expect rather that we'll look forward to possibility of a third reading in the not too distant future. Director Lapointe. Next item up under request for decision is item 6.2, the municipal naming and sponsorship policy update. The floor is yours.
Thank you. And good evening, Mayor Creasy and Council. This evening, administration is presenting the municipal naming and sponsorship policy for Council's review and approval. The city's current policy is somewhat dated and only allows for the naming of parks and playgrounds, meaning that facilities are excluded. This policy looks to establish a common language for municipal naming with a focus on simplifying and broadening the naming scope to include all city assets. Further, it highlights the naming of city streets and roads as the Planning and Development Services Department's responsibility. Policy will also now include sponsorship as a method of naming city assets. Similar to the Community Builder Partnership Policy, administration recommends the establishment of a $10,000 threshold for sponsorship naming agreements. If an amount exceeds that threshold, council makes the final determination. Administration will be authorized to approve sponsorships for agreements below that amount. If approved, this policy will replace policies 717.01 and 75112.5.50. However, the policy does maintain the commitment to maintaining all existing naming agreements. For instance, if an agreement was silent on term, this policy assumes that the name was to remain permanently in place. With that, I'm open to any questions you may have.
Thank you. So I don't see this as being a very big deviation from our current practice, but it does kind of formalize things and allow people to take advantage of a given process on that. I think it's a good development in my opinion, and by the number of lights that I see on, I think everybody must think the same, or maybe it's not a big issue. Councillor Ross.
Thank you, Mayor Creasy. I'll just make the motion. The council approves the municipal naming and sponsorship policy 11/462.01 2024 PO as presented.
Thank you. Anyone have any questions or concerns? Mr. Dallas is good. Very good. Please go ahead and vote. That is passed unanimously as well. The municipal naming and sponsorship policy is now in effect. Mhm. The additional ones. Thank you. I appreciate the reminder and the possibility of some other updates to the policy. Councillor Hoekstra.
Thank you, Mayor Creasy. I was going to move that council rescinds naming of parks and playgrounds policy 75/717.0104.
Thank you. Chief Gowdy, was that to do with this motion or something else? Very good. Nothing online. Please go ahead and vote. That item is passed unanimously as well. And that previous parks playground policy therefore rescinded. Councillor Hibbs. Actually, I'm sorry. CAO Gowdy did have his light on prior, and I think it's probably for the upcoming item, so please proceed.
It's for a separate.
Very good. In that case, Councillor Hibbs, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mayor Creasy. I was just going to move that council rescind the Bill Douglas Field policy.
Director Lapointe, for those individuals who watch this at a later date or at home, could you give us the Reader's Digest version of the Bill Douglas Field policy?
Thank you.
Essentially, council of the day passed a policy indicating that that field would be named after Bill Douglas, and that would stay that way in perpetuity. So again, part of the reason the current policy was drafted the way it was to acknowledge the fact that these previous agreements were in existence and that we would continue to maintain our commitment to those.
Very good. And I wanted that to be known publicly, because by having this specific one in there, it appears to be quite the opposite. And quite frankly, I don't feel like hearing from Mr. Douglas's sons on a negative item here. So I think that explanation sums it up, that that field will be named that in perpetuity, which is an honorable and very good thing. So thank you for that. I just wanted that to be known by everybody watching at home. Any other questions or concerns? Please go ahead and vote. And that is passed unanimously as well. Our legislative coordinator is wearing many hats this evening, and I think I threw her off by and we're getting very close to 6 o'clock. I think given that the other items for the hearing cannot start previous 6, I think I'm going to briefly go through our next meeting items here, which is a requirement according to our policy as well. So for all of you to update your calendars, We have a regular council meeting here in Chambers at 5:30 PM, scheduled for Monday, April 8th, which was alluded to with the postponed item that we spoke of earlier. Then we have a committee of the whole meeting proposed for here in Chambers at 5:30 PM on Monday, April 15th. And as you can see, the in parentheses there, if approved at the March 25th, 24 council meeting. And in fact, it was in the consent agenda, one of those items that sometimes I think could be a little difficult. If anybody has a problem with that, I expect we'll still hear about it. That has been approved. And then our next meeting is another regular council meeting here in Chambers at 5:30 then, of course, and that is proposed for, scheduled rather, for Monday, April 22nd. Those will be upcoming meetings. CEO Gowdy.
Thank you, Mayor Creasy. I need to correct some information that I provided to Councilor Ross and Council earlier this evening when you asked about the 60-meter limit. The Municipal Government Act actually specifies that notice of the bylaw resolution, meeting, public hearing, or other thing must be, and then point B is mailed or delivered to every residence in the area to which the proposed bylaw resolution or other thing relates, or in which the meeting or hearing is to be held. And so different municipalities have interpreted that different ways. Many municipalities actually only notify the neighboring properties. And so 60 meters would be at the upper end of where other municipalities are going. There are municipalities reviewing this right now. Airdrie just expanded theirs to 60 meters. The city of Calgary considered it, but citing cost concerns is maintaining actually neighboring only. They considered 20, 40, and 60. So I apologize that earlier I had said 60 meters was the provincially set standard. Actually, the provincially set standard is something lower than that. You could certainly, as council, adopt something higher than that. There would be an administrative cost to notifying additional people. And of course, there is that consideration of how far land use decisions actually have a measurable impact. But I apologize that I earlier said differently.
We appreciate you bringing that to our attention. We have a short recess until our 6 p.m. Items brought forward for public hearing with respect to bylaw 400.53. And that's for changes to the residential detached narrow home district. And we will reconvene at 6 p.m. And I will reconvene our meeting 6:02 for our public hearing. And as stated earlier for bylaw 400.53, land use bylaw amendment changes to the residential detached narrow district rather, R1N. So that I declare the statutory public hearing for bylaw 400.53 now open, and that this hearing is held pursuant to sections 7, 8, 30, 230, 606, 640, and 692 of the Municipal Government Act 2000 as amended, and request the legislative coordinator to confirm the purpose of this public hearing, that the statutory public hearing notice was advertised in the local newspaper, and that any written submissions received and not included in the public hearing agenda package are read into the record.
Thank you, Mayor Creasy and Council. The purpose of the public hearing is for the amending bylaw 400.53, given first reading February 26, 2024. Bylaw 400.53 proposes to amend land use bylaw 400. If approved, bylaw 400.53 will change the setbacks, parcel area, and parcel width requirements for lots designated as residential detached narrow district R1N. The specific amendments as depicted in the table on the advertisement would apply to all parcels in Lacombe designated R1N. Per section 606 of the MGA requirements for advertising, a public hearing notice was advertised as shown on page of the agenda in the Lacombe Express Thursday, February 29th, 2024, and Thursday, March 7th, 2024. Mayor Creasy and Council, one written submission was received and is included in the agenda package, and the city has received no registrations from members of the public to speak.
Thank you, Coordinator Bellbono. Remind that all persons giving oral presentations are to clearly state their name, and presentations are to be brief and to the point. The order, the statutory public hearing presentation will be as follows. First off, our development officer or designate, followed by those in favor, then those who are opposed, and finally, any person deemed to be affected who wishes to be heard. So with that in mind, I'm assuming Planner McLaughlin is going to be kicking things off for us today. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Mayor Creasy, and good evening, Mayor, members of council. As mentioned by the legislative coordinator, the bylaw before you is bylaw 400.53, and it's proposing amendments to the land use bylaw to the residential detached narrow district, herein referred to as R1N throughout the presentation. And administration is recommending that council give second and third reading to bylaw 400.53 as amended. So there will be some amendments to first reading that I will be going through. So for information, this application was received by a developer to make amendments. However, if it is approved, it would apply to all parcels that are designated R1N. So it would benefit multiple sites and not just the one developer. Allowing these amendments would provide greater flexibility in building design and design options for future housing. So for your information for R1N, these are just residential detached dwelling lots, but they're typically smaller than an R1 parcel. And an R1 designation has been in place since 2016. The map on the screen, you can see the outlines in red show you the existing developed R1N properties in Lacombe. So there's 119 developed R1N. We did go through the outline plans that Lacombe has where future R1N parcels are designated, and overall there'd be 147 if they're all built out as per the existing outline plans. So the remainder of the R1N parcels would be developed in the Mackenzie Ranch neighborhood. So although this will primarily apply to those, it will apply to future outline plans or any amendments to outline plans that might get made. So the proposed amendments are in regards to the parcel development regulations. So the minimum front yard currently is 6 meters. And the recommendation is to reduce that to 4 meters or to 6 meters where the parcel is on a collector road or has front parking. And a portion of that has been amended since first reading. And that portion is the 6 meters where there is a collector road or front parking. There's also a request to reduce the minimum side yard. There's a few different measurements for side yard for interior, corner lots, and laneless lots. So the amendment is to reduce the side yards from 1.5 to 1.25 on an interior lot, 2.75 to 2.4 on a corner lot, and no changes to a laneless lot. There's no changes to the minimum rear yard setbacks proposed. There's an amendment to the parcel width from 10.5 to 10.3 on an interior and 11.75 to 11.5 on a corner lot. And then also amendments to reduce the overall size or the parcel area from 375 square meters to 330 square meters on an interior and 410 to 360 square meters on a corner lot. So since first reading, we did meet with the developer and had a conversation in regards to the amendments that were being requested and gained some clarity on their request as well as what the proposed amendments would be and what would be recommended to council moving forward. So from first reading, as I mentioned, we did amend to add some verbiage in the minimum front yard to add or 6 meters where the parcel is on a collector road or front parking is proposed. And we just want to ensure that this statement is in there so that if there is a front garage proposed, they would still need to have a sufficient distance to park a vehicle on a front driveway. And 4 meters is not sufficient. So we wanted to make it clear that that would still be required so that we don't have vehicles hanging over sidewalks. We are also amending from first reading the minimum side yard. So initially the first reading bylaw was for 1.2, but we're increasing that to 1.25. So we had a conversation with the applicant and the increase is just to allow a slight margin of error in siting and construction. So once a building is less than 1.2 meters, so even at 1.19, the Alberta Building Code differs. So in order to allow the applicant that leeway, we can control that a little bit by having the bylaw at 1.25 and give them those few centimeters to have that error in siting so that their building does not end up less than 1.2 meters. And the applicant was fine with that change and agreed with our reasoning in regards to increasing that. And then in first reading, there were no amendments to the minimum parcel area proposed at the time. But again, after that conversation, there are some changes that are necessary. And that's just due to if we're changing the setbacks and we're changing the lot width, then it's appropriate to also change the minimum parcel area. And so the changes are from 375 to 330 for interior lots and 410 to 360 square meters for corner lots. And again, in the interest in increasing density as well as the parcel area and to increase density, the parcel area reductions are included for second reading. So when it comes to density, the policy in the MDP to promote efficiency and use of resources, the MDP requests that a minimum of 15 units per developable hectare is in each neighborhood or outline plan. And so we did look at all of the current outline plans and what those densities are currently sitting at, and they do vary across all of the different neighborhoods. And we can also see that in the R1 parcels, when we look at how many units are there and the hectares that are allotted to those, the parcels are a little bit bigger than the land use bylaw requires. And so there is a little bit of leeway that can be done to those parcel areas by reducing them to possibly increase density in some of the neighborhoods and bring them closer to that 15 units per hectare. So there's a couple of calculations that we did when it came to seeing what these changes do to the actual density. So when we look at the lot width reduction, it doesn't seem like a lot. So if we took a street length of 200 meters at 10.5 meter lots versus 10.3 meter lots, we end up with 19 lots or 19.4. So it's only an increase of 0.4 when you look at it at a street length of 200 meters. But when you look at it from an overall density in a neighborhood, that could add a couple of extra properties into that outline plan. And then we also looked at Mackenzie Ranch as well, and looked at the area for R1N parcels. So 29,500 square meters of land is designated for R1N parcels, and proposed in the outline plan is 68 units. So that gave us a lot area of 433.8 square meters. If the lots were developed at the proposed amendment amount of 330, we would get 89 units with that same amount of land area. So that's about a 30% increase in density if the lots were actually subdivided to the minimum land use bylaw requirement being proposed in the amendment of 330 meters squared. And there's some give or take in there because we didn't consider corner parcels, which would require a little bit more land density, but it gives an idea of what the amendments could do to increase density in some of the neighborhoods. We also did our municipal comparisons. And so we looked at 16 municipalities, which is more than Lacomb's municipal comparators, because the applicant also provided us with some municipalities that they had. So there's a lot of numbers on the screen. But essentially what we were able to look at is that many of the municipalities do have reduced setbacks than Lacombe has in regards to the R1N parcels. There are some municipalities that weren't direct comparisons because they don't have a narrow lot district. And so you can't directly compare what they allow because some of them have small lot districts, but instead of just allowing detached dwellings, they also allow different housing types. So those are the 5 on the right-hand side of the screen, starting at High River, which had no comparison type of district and compared to Lacombe to R1N. And so what we were able to determine was that when it came to the front yard setback of the current regulation of 6 meters, only 4 of the 16 comparators also had 6 meters, and the rest of them had less setbacks than 6 meters than Lacombe did. When it came to the side yard setback, it was the same determination. 4 of the 16 had the same 1.5, but 12 of them had less than Lacombe required. When it comes to the lot width minimum, that was where there's more deviation in what the different municipalities have. So the same as Lacombe at 10.5 was 5 of the 16. We had 7 that were less, and then we also had 4 which were more than Lacombe. So they're a little bit more across the board. And then when it came to the parcel area, it was very similar. A lot of them did have less than Lacombe, and 4 of the compares don't have parcel area requirements, provided they meet all their other requirements like setbacks, parking, and landscaping. So as mentioned, when it comes to the request that was made from the applicant. So we're reducing the front yard from 6 meters to 4 meters, or 6 meters where the parcel is located on a collector or has front parking proposed. Reducing the minimum side yard from 1.5 to 1.25, or 2.75 to 2.4. And again, reducing the minimum parcel width from 10.5 to 10.3. and 11.75 to 11.5, and reducing the minimum parcel area. And so overall, these amendments are aimed to give a little bit more flexibility in building design to the developers, as well as allow for a larger developable building area. They would align Lacombe further with the municipal comparators that we looked at. And then in the MDP, there is a policy which supports the smaller housing options, which is where R1N would have been developed from, but it has been since 2016. So it's appropriate to look at the regulations again to determine whether these changes do need to be made. And so this just ensures that the community remains affordable as well. And the developer's representative is here, and I think he's going to talk a little bit more about affordability. R1N is meant to be an entry-level type lot for people who don't want a townhouse or a duplex, where they do still want to own a detached dwelling in the opportunity of that smaller lot, which is usually substantially less than a typical R1 1,200 square foot house, where these lots are generally where you get a 900 or 1,000 square foot house. And so the amendments will help Lacombe adapt to the changing trend and building the economy. We did do the landowner consultation. So when it came to this consultation, because this affects all of Lacombe and not just a specific area, the targeted consultation was done to the developers who own properties in the outline plans that have R1 designated lots, as well as the builders who would have built R1 houses, R1N. Sorry. And then as per the MGA, it was advertised in the Lacombe Express and on the city's website. We did receive one comment that similar setbacks should be applied to R4, and this was just a verbal conversation. Nothing written was handed in. And then the one comment that is in your agenda package, but the agenda package letter has broader statements about increasing density more so in the downtown area and not necessarily targeted to the R1N, but R1N would increase density if these changes are made potentially in future outline plans or if amendments are made. And so, as mentioned, we do recommend that council amend bylaw 400.53 by replacing and adding the text, as I mentioned through my presentation, and those amendments from first reading. And then we recommend that council give second and third reading to bylaw 400.53. Thank you.
Thank you, Planner McLaughlin. Appreciate that. Would now ask anyone who wishes to speak in favor of bylaw 400.53. Now is your opportunity. And now just a reminder to please use the microphone so that our guests watching online are able to hear you when the red light is on. The floor is yours.
Right. Hello, Mayor and Council. Thank you for allowing me to speak to you today in favor of the proposed amendment to the land use bylaw 400.53, especially the R1N zoning. My name is Ron Henschel, and I'm speaking on behalf of 867-407 Alberta Limited, the Mackenzie Ranch Development Owners Group, the applicant for this proposed amendment. My company, Strategic Project Service Limited, has been contracted by 86407 Alberta Limited since 2014 and to provide project management services for the development of the Mackenzie Ranch development. In my role for the Mackenzie Ranch project, I prepare the concept development plans and preliminary cost estimates from which the developers make their decisions on how to and if to proceed with their projects. In performing these tasks, I become very familiar with the requirements of the land use bylaw and how they impact the overall development process and ultimately the success of the project. It was during the planning of this next phase of Mackenzie Ranch that it was decided that the applicant wanted to amend the current R1N zoning, and the reasons are as follows. The minimum front and side yards. It was noted that the current Lacombe bylaw minimum setbacks vary from many of the other communities in central Alberta. And the developer and I work in a number of those, so it was just an obvious thing to look at to see if there was a taste for the city here to take a look at those setbacks. It was felt that the amending the bylaw would be in line with neighboring communities and would benefit both the city of Lacombe as well as the development, as the amendments would improve the developability and ultimately the affordability of the new R1N lots. The minimum lot width, as was stated by staff, the reductions that we're requesting are relatively minor, 0.2 meters for the interiors and only 0.25 for the corner lots. And I guess the rationale that we got to that point is that with the current interior width of 10.5 and when with the current side yards, this allows for a 24-foot, 7 1/4 inch wide house. The housing industry builds houses in increments of 2 feet. My understanding, that's because of the foundation cribbers. They have all their forms pre-made. They come out and then down to 2 feet. If you want to go less than that, it's very expensive to start cutting forms. So generally, I would say 99.5 or 99.9% of houses are in 2-foot increments. So when I go to lay out lots and just design the layout for the subdivision, I base it on 2-foot increments. And I always at 7¼ inches, builds up over time. And given the set length of a block, sometimes I'll end up with a half or 3/4 of a lot that I can't use and get a lot in. So then that ends up gets spread out over all the lots, and it's almost like wasted space. And lots are bigger, but for a developer, it's like wasted space. So when combining, reducing the minimum width and with the minimum side yards, this would allow us to get a 26-foot wide house on a slightly narrower lot. And using those extra spaces, we'll end up with 1 or 2 extra lots in that block. And just to note that it's a minimum width, and the developer may increase the width to allow for wider homes, to provide an assortment of lot sizes to meet the larger house market. The increased lot widths would be done in 2-foot increments. We would go from 24, 26, 28, 30-foot wide lots. And saying that, I think we may have been a little short-sighted. We were trying to address just what we were looking at that. I think if we talk to the overall affordability and developability of land, I think at some point in the future, at another time, we may want to talk and look at that minimum width, to look at smaller houses, smaller lots, increase the densities. I think as was presented, our current density in Mackenzie Ranch is just over 13 units per hectare, and this increase will bring us closer to 15, but I don't think it's going to surpass 15 by very much. But it's something that I think we need to look at as a whole, as the industry and municipalities need to look as we struggle toward finding affordable homes. With the current inflation in the market, we're all facing price of land, financing, servicing costs, price of lumber to build homes, price of supply of other materials. Costs have, I think, surpassed, I think, what the public aims as an affordable home, even on the R1N level. So I can touch upon that a little bit more later if you're willing to give me a little bit more time. The minimum lot areas were reduced. It was more of a product of a narrower lot and a shorter lot. It just shrunk the lot a little bit. So again, there was fairly minimal. As stated in the staff report, the proposed changes will allow for a greater flexibility in the lot sizing and housing types, as well as a more efficient and cost-effective development. From the developer's perspective, the above changes will allow them to develop lots that are more affordably priced and meet the current depressed housing market. The lower cost will also lead to lower home costs, which will help in meeting federal, provincial, and municipal initiatives for affordable housing. I thank you again for allowing me to speak, and I would be happy to answer any questions. I have a bit more deal with the affordability aspect of it if you're willing to give me a little bit more time, or carry on with that.
Did council have any questions at this time? Councilor Gullickson.
Thank you, Mayor Creasy. I think it was addressed, but this will not affect any building code issues. Is that correct? There won't be any additional costs because they're a little closer together?
No, it will not. My understanding is that under 2.4 meter side yards, we still have to meet all the fire codes, no openings in the windows, that type of thing. So reducing it from 1.5 down to 1.25 will not change that.
Very good. And I guess just a reminder that we will have time in our request for decision, item 6.1, to go over additional things as well. more as ever of a reminder to you about the extra time involved. That's not to stifle anybody from asking questions about the public hearing portion, though. Councilor Ross?
Thank you, Mayor Creasy. By having the front setback stay at 6 meters, does that reduce the total density per hectare of the number of units?
It will not, but it would allow us to build a slightly larger home on the smaller lot to help meet, I guess, the housing market demands for different people. It gives a slightly different change, a look to the street front, but not significantly so. But it won't affect the density. I shouldn't, I mean, correct me if I'm wrong. I'm just currently speaking to the current Mackenzie Ranch because the lotting of the blocks are already set out. So the lot depths will remain the same. There's no appetite on their part to redo the entire development. But if you're looking at a new layout plan, a new outline plan, the reduced lot depths on say on a quarter section could net another row of houses. So yeah, it would increase the density on the overall quarter section of land, which would then again help to bring the residential developments up to the desired 15 units per hectare or greater.
Anything else you'd like to add?
Nothing more from me at this point.
Very good. Thank you very much. I would ask anyone else who wishes to speak in favor of bylaw 400.53, please step forward. Seeing none, I will call on those who wish to speak in opposition of this bylaw to step forward. Thankfully for us, people watching at home can't realize that there's no other people eligible to speak here that haven't already, but we do have to go through the process according to the MGA. One more call, excuse me, one more call for anyone wishing to speak in opposition. Pardon me, of bylaw 400.53. Seeing none, we'll move into any person who's deemed to be affected by this decision who wishes to be heard. At this time, now is your opportunity. And one more call for anyone wishing to speak now who is deemed affected. Got sufficient time? There are none. So I declare the public hearing for bylaw 400.53 to be now closed at 6:30 p.m. Pardon me. Yeah, I got some here. Thanks, but Sparky. So an opportune time to move into request for decision. Item 6.1 relating to the same bylaw 400.53 land use bylaw for residential detached narrow district R1N. Proposed for possibility this evening of second and third reading. Planner McLaughlin, once again, the floor is yours.
Manager Hackett and I welcome any questions on the proposed amendment if you have any.
And as stated by Planner McLaughlin in her presentation, there is a recommendation that Council first amend 400.53 with the changes from first reading. And then it is recommended that second and third reading be given tonight. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Hoekstra.
Thanks, Mayor Creasy. I'm willing to move that council amends bylaw 400.53 by replacing and adding text in section 9.14.2 prior to second reading as follows. Would the mayor like me to read through everything that's written here, or yes?
In fact, we do have to have it on the record, Councillor
Minimum.
Dijkstra, but we appreciate you stepping forward.
Minimum front yard, 4.0 meters to 6 meters where the parcel is on a collector road or front parking is proposed. Minimum side yard, 1.25 meters or 2.4 meters where the property abuts a public roadway other than a lane, or 3 meters on one side on a laneless lot where no front garage exists. Minimum parcel area, interior parcel 330 meters square and corner parcel 360 meters square.
Thank you. Councillor Hibbs.
Thank you, Mayor Creasy. So I'm definitely a big proponent of this zoning. I do like it. I do appreciate the density. I do appreciate the affordability of it. I think that it's a very valuable tool that we have, and I'm glad to see that it will continue being used in the community. I do have a couple questions, however. So I obviously note that the minimum requirement for parcel width and depth, for that matter, is being requested to be smaller. Now, not much smaller, I realize that. But I would say that this is potentially one kind of weak point of this zoning is potentially parking. And I say that because if you have people parking in front of your home, so for example, if your own parking is in the back and you just have street frontage, you might be able to squeeze in 2 vehicles. If you have a front driveway, you might be able to squeeze in another vehicle on, like, in front of your property, not blocking your driveway. When we start talking about reducing those widths further, I just have concerns about the impact that this might have on street parking. And as we all know, especially if you've sat on MPC, that is generally quite often a friction point for neighbors. So I just have concerns about that shift. Granted, I realize that it's a small shift, but it just seems that in my anecdotal experience with that division, it's already an issue. And so the idea of reducing it potentially across the board does, I think, add a stress. So I have concerns about that. Just an additional comment on, I really appreciated that one graphic that you had about the densities across different neighborhoods within the community. But I did notice the absence of downtown, and I was just curious if you have that information. I don't need it right now, but I would love to have access to that so that we could see a density report on, like, all the neighborhoods in the community. I think that would actually be very helpful when we're talking about affordable housing. And then one last question. And this is kind of in reference to the one letter that was provided earlier to do with the public hearing. And it was just talking about essentially the frustration that property owners can face when, they have a property and then it's, to use a lack of a better word, under threat of being changed zoning wise, or maybe their neighbors are being changed zoning wise. And just for something that's somewhat relevant maybe to their context, I was just curious, if you have a current R1 lot, is it possible to now subdivide that R1 lot into 2 R1Ns?
Thank you, Councillor Hibb, for your question. So I'll start with your parking question. So we do hear a lot about parking. That's everybody's main complaint typically. When it comes to R1N properties, the minimum parking, they still have to have parking on their property. So they're required to have 2 off-street parking stalls, which typically end up in the back as gravel parking stalls in the back. Generally with R1N, because they're more affordable, many of them don't have front attached garages. So that reduces the driveways that are on the street, reducing street parking and those types of things. So because R1Ns are more affordable, generally they may not have a front attached garage. But when we look at a parking stall requirement, it is 5.5 meters. So 2 stalls, if 2 cars were gonna park in front of that house, then it's 11 meters with the lot width requirements of 10.3. So you're not gonna get exactly 2 cars parked in front of somebody's home, but they do still have to have that off-street parking to give that availability of on-street for an additional car or visitors or guests. Do you have anything to add? For parking? Okay. In regards to your last question about the current R1 subdividing into an R1N, there certainly would be the processes that have to be followed, but if an R1 property was wide enough to be subdivided, then yes, it could potentially be subdivided and rezoned to R1N. That would be part of the process, but there would be multiple processes that would have to happen. But in that case, an R1 property is typically 12 meters. And then you're looking at subdividing, you're not going to get technically to RNs unless the lot's going to be 21 meters wide.
Thank you. And I would just add to that, of course, the rezoning would be a council decision. And often if we had an outline plan in place, it might be even an outline plan amendment to go from R1 to R1N. That would be a different type of zoning. So it certainly wouldn't be something that happened without the neighbors realizing or having an opportunity to participate in that process.
Thank you for that. So just so I haven't read this wrong, so currently the width is 200 centimeters more than what is proposed. 0.2 meters.
Yes, that's correct.
So I mean, really, the impact on parking is really non-existent. That's 8 inches in the width of the lot.
Street parking?
Yes.
Yes, that's correct.
Okay.
It would be minimal, as you've stated.
Okay. Just wanted to make sure I wasn't missing something there. Councillor Dallas?
Thank you, Mayor Creasy. I guess Councillor Hibbs, if you went through my list of items, you guys went through and just answered them, so I appreciate that. I think there was some current concerns about turning R1s into R1Ns, and just kind of the way I saw it was there was no benefit to it unless it was exactly 20.5 meters wide, because otherwise you could, if it was larger than that, you could just turn it into 2 R1s in my mind. But so I appreciate that. And then the parking, yeah, I was concerned about the parking in the rear, and as we often see in these tighter lots, there is a parking concern and concerns with that. So yeah, you know, I know 8 inches isn't much of a difference, and so these parking concerns can still be on our minds, and we can look forward to addressing them in other ways. So I'm in favor of this in these areas that are designed for them, and so I think that's what the developer is looking for. And I know there could be some other side effects with lots that are kind of one-offs, but in the sense of going forward with the future and developing these, I think this is a benefit for us. So thank you for listening.
Thank you. I understand you're coming at us from a substantially different time zone, so hopefully fish and chips are on you later.
Oh yes, luckily we're an hour closer now, so thank you.
Councillor Ross.
Thank you, Mayor Creasy. I think this is great in a new subdivision. I think there's obviously a very strong demanding for more affordable housing for these young families. We need to, it's an area maybe we're lacking within the city of Lacombe. I do have a concern about the minimum front yard. Typically, I'm sorry, but I don't think you see most people parking in the back, especially in the winter. I think that 6-meter front, and I know it might affect the design of the house, but as far as the feedback in general, if once again experience an MPC or your most common issues coming forth is the parking. how are you going to park for 4 meters? Obviously, you stated, and it's obviously not going to park to the vehicle on your own property in front of your house. So, in other words, all the other measurements are very logically put together for all the right reasons. It accommodates demographics that I think Lacombe is lacking, and it's even great that it's in a specific area. I think it's easier to, rather than have it in a demolition of a lot of an R1 area. I also think that it's easy to have the consistency where apartments are apartments, you know, duplexes are in duplexes and so forth. I like that consistency, but I don't support not having 6 meters in front. And I realize there's some drawbacks, but it's, yeah, I'm concerned with the parking.
And just for clarity for that item, with respect to the 6 meters, in a case where a particular lot development does fall on a collector road, the minimum is 6 meters, correct? But not in a conventional residential street.
That's correct.
Thank you.
Or Mayor Creasy, in the event that they would like to have a front driveway or front garage, then it would be 6 meters as well. So the 4 meters would be where their developers choosing not to have parking in the front.
Regardless of the proximity to a collector road with the garage.
Not on a collector and not with parking on the front. They can have the 4 meter, the smaller, but if it's on a collector road or with parking in the front, then it needs to be 6 meters.
Thank you. Councillor Connick?
Thank you, Mayor Creasy. So first a question and some comments. So the HERF requirements state, so the houses in this subdivision will not have side windows, is that correct, on the side of the house?
That is, yes, that's correct. So that information is was provided from the safety codes officer on the analysis section. So because of the, sorry, I'm just reading here. So they already have to have 45-minute fire resistance rating, non-combustible cladding, and no unprotected openings for anything less than 2.4 meters in Lacombe, and that would be because of the fire response time.
Right. No, and I just wanted clarification on that, because that'll lead into my next comment. So I live in an R1N. I can't imagine my house not having side windows on it, number one, because there's lots of natural light there and it's terrific. So that's my first, and I get the HERF requirements for very good reasons. We've seen the reasons why. So I just wanted that clarification. Secondly, I won't be voting for this, in favor of this at all, because I live in an R1N. Parking's been brought up. You made some great points about, well, there's parking, they have to have parking in the rear. I can speak from personal experience. Neighbor across the way has a double detached garage, doesn't park in it. Neighbor beside him, double detached garage, doesn't park in it. Neighbor beside me, double detached garage. 4 vehicles he has between 2 people. I have a double detached garage. My wife and I park in it. My 2 kids park in front. Parking, I don't think you understand how, I don't see how you can narrow these lots up and still think that you can park a pickup truck and a minivan in front of your house. It's not possible. You will encroach onto neighbors. And you can say, well, it's not a big deal. I have one neighbor who gets quite upset if you park in front of his house, if someone comes over to visit. He's visibly angry that people park in front of his house. I think many people think wrongly, unfortunately, that they have some propriety interest to the street. They don't. It's public property, but so for those reasons alone, I can't get on board because it is a big deal. Like I say, you can put the 2 lots and 2 spots in the back. I get that. I was recently in Black Falls showing some property, and there was a subdivision that was all townhouses, all of it. And each townhouse had 2 spots in the back. But again, they're vacant. People park in front of their homes, and just doesn't work for me. And the fact that you want to, I get the affordability question, but you can still build an affordable house. It doesn't have to be 26 feet. It can be 24, just on a slightly, you may have more side yard then, right? You can still build an affordable house. You don't have to go to the 26 feet. So I know, I mean, as it is now, I can reach out my window and shake my neighbor's hand if he wanted to. I just can't imagine getting closer together, even with the HERF requirements. I can't get on board. The other comment I wanted to make, oh, it escapes me for a minute. Hold on. Yeah, I can't remember now. It'll probably come back to me, but oh, density. We're speaking about density. Well, we already addressed that in our land use bylaw, in that when we do an outline plan or an area structure plan, our land use bylaw is very good about this, actually. A good example is Metcalf. When you have so many houses that have to be single family, but then you have to have R2s in there, right? So we are making efforts as a community to increase density already, especially in new developments. I get this one has already been slated as R1N right from the get-go, so that's a little bit different. But the whole issue of increasing density, I think we do a good job of that already as a city in outline plans and area structure plans already. So I can appreciate why the developer wants to do this. It makes perfect sense. But as someone who lives in an R1N, I can't see how you can get tighter than we already are. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Gullickson.
Thank you, Mayor Creasy. Clarification, so we're talking 20 centimeters difference on the lots, is that correct, width-wise?
Mhm.
So like the 4 meter and the 6 meter that we're talking about there is from the front of the house to the street, correct?
That's right. So that's just bringing the house
4.
closer to the
Yeah,
street at 4
exactly.
meters instead of.
So we're only talking 20 centimeters difference in the available parking out front. Okay. All right. I live in an area where parking is an issue also, but I don't believe this will make any difference at all. People's attitudes towards parking, if there's no parking out front, they'll park in the back if it's available to them. Eventually, we have no alleys in my area, and people park in front of my house all the time. So it's an attitude as much as anything. So I don't think the 20 centimeters is going to make much difference. Thank you.
Councillor Dallas.
Thank you, Mayor Creasy. Yeah, I agree with Councillor Gullickson. I don't think this really will make a difference in regards to parking. I also believe that if parking is a huge concern in these areas and these specifically zoned areas, we can implement tools to take advantage of that. Other communities have these same things where you're required for permits, and I know this requires additional work for administration to do that, but you can get permitted parking in your residential areas where you are allowed a certain number of permits. I think that is one tool we can go through if we find that there is a problem with this. When it comes to the driveways or the setbacks in the front, I think there are examples in other communities where people find there isn't enough parking and they wind up just parking on their front yard. But we have implemented in our bylaw already that doesn't allow that. And I think the developer would be wise to consider whether or not they want front parking pads in front of their homes, and that's up for them to decide. So that's all I have to say in regards to parking. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Hibbs.
Thank you, Mayor Creasy. I just wanted to point out 2 things. One thing, it's whatever it is per lot, but times however many houses are on that street and starts adding up to equal parking spaces. And 2, there's what it looks like on paper, and then there's the realities. So for those of us that actually have lived or currently live in an R1N district, listen, because they know. So on paper is different than what the actualities are. And I'm just saying that it might seem like a small amount, but it isn't a small amount.
Thank you for that. So we've had a lot of talk about this distance thing, and I was curious. Works out to 200 centimeters, about 7.5 inches. Some quick calculations. I came up with needing about 56 lots to save that 7.5 inches each to make an additional single lot. And I rather doubt, I could be wrong, but I rather doubt there's many streets with 56 R1 ends in a row. And once again, I think to suggest that parking is only an issue in R1 is ridiculous. Parking absolutely is an issue everywhere. However, we make choices about where we live for a variety of reasons. And the simple fact of the matter is, if it makes for some more affordable lots, myself, I am all for this. Will there be some sacrifices with parking? Without question, regardless of whether or not this has changed. So I therefore am in favor of it. I did, however, want just to speak on the process of this. I don't think there's very many other communities where we have examples of developers coming forward with attainable, genuine ways of, in an effort to keep prices down and offer additional types of housing. And I think this is a real feather in the hat for both our administration and the Planning and Development Department, and good for the developer. Yes, in fact, I did hear from one of the principals there, one other builder who are for this. And I don't think this is just a squeeze out an extra lot or a couple extra lots on a quarter section for the sake of a few dollars. I think they're genuinely trying to provide a more affordable product to a segment of the population that would dearly love to have it. So for that reason, I'm very much in favor of this. And I don't think that the asks and the changes here are significant enough to cause a big outrage for neighborhood parking, in my opinion. Councillor Ross.
Thank you, Mayor Creasy. So to specify, I guess, what's most common to occur in a develop like this is the developer gonna build the homes first and have them listed and sold, or they're gonna be custom built. I guess I'm trying to support this as far as it's 4 and 6 meters, because I would hope that it's going to be concerned with anybody building as well as, because once again, I agree with Councillor Koenig, and I've seen other townhouses and so forth, is the very little parking being used in the back. You might as well have that as family space and put the house back farther and have the 6 meter front, because you can have all the parking in the back, but if it's not used, that's wasted space. So yeah, I wish you picked one or the other, 4 or 6, because I think when you say 4 and or 6, where under a specific area, if it's a main artery, well, I think that's too subjective. It's, if it was one or the other, it would be black and white. But because then you say, well, what's a main artery, what's not? Well, you could interpret it in a gray area. I think it would be presented better if it was one or the other, because you know, what artery doesn't turn into a main artery for everybody in that street? It could be interpreted, it's gray, and I find that sometimes keep it black and white.
Appreciate your comments, Councillor Ross. I think, however, our administration probably has something to say. We're not in a position to arbitrarily call or designate roads as to the type. That is, in fact, is a cut and dried black and white thing. And I was also curious with this possibility of garages on these RWIN lots. Out of the, I've actually forgotten the numbers. Is there like 140 or 160 total in Lacombe of the R1s? How many of those, in fact, of the existing ones would have a front garage?
So to answer that question, in total in the outline plans, there's 147 R1N designated, but I don't know how many of them would actually have front attached garages. So my comment was based on the knowledge of typically what R1N properties are. Is there small detached dwelling housing? But we do have Ron here who would maybe have a little bit more information in the style that does get built on the R1N property. So he can certainly make an additional comment. I do want to clarify one thing that Councillor Ross has mentioned in regards to the 4 meters or the 6 meters. If the front yard setback remained at 6 meters, that doesn't mean they have to have parking in the front. So if they don't put in a front parking pad or a front driveway, then they would still have to have their 2 stalls in the back. So just because it's 6 meters doesn't mean that it will have front parking. It just is that option. And we wanted to put that in the bylaw to clarify that if they do want a front attached garage, it has to be 6 meters. And that's just to meet the depth of a parking stall, and so that we don't run into issues there. But at 6 meters, they don't have to have parking in the front.
Appreciate that clarification. Mr. Henschel, would you care to speak to the idea of the front garages? Naturally, it's been brought up here a couple of times, and I'm curious if you would, in a position to provide us some sort of background of approximately how many there would be now or moving forward. Is this something that's a common thing or not? What's the situation?
Your Honor, for an R1N house, it's not typically common to put front garages because they are built as an affordable option. A garage would add $20,000, $30,000 to the price of the home easily, with a front driveway, maybe even 40,000. So it does add quite a bit to it. So it's a different market. Having said that, I worked with a developer in Sylvan Lake, and we developed R1N lots in his last phase. And we thought in planning it, one side of the street was in this development. We stayed to the minimum widths, and they built R1N homes, small homes with no front garages on them. On the other side of the street, it backed onto a couple pipelines, an open area. So he thought there may be a market, a little more open area in the back, might be a market for a little larger home. So we made those lots wider, and he did put front garages on those. But as I said, it is a costly upgrade, and depending on the market that you're trying to meet, and it would have to be a decision at the start of the project when we do the layout. The developer would make that decision as long as we met the bylaw, whether it would be a 6 meter front yard or a 4 meter, and it would be consistent along the block. We wouldn't want a 4 meter house and a 6 meters, 4 meters, 6 meters, because it gives an undefined frontage. So it would be defined at the start. So it'd either be 4 or 6 for that block. And the decision would be made whether they're doing garages or not. That would be made at the time they tell me, and then I start laying out the lots and sizing them. So it'd be done very early in the process, and it would be consistent in the development.
Thank you. Does anyone have any further questions or concerns? Looking for electronic participant here. We're good there. So just so there's no confusion on where we're at with motions, I'm going to have Coordinator Bella Bono reread the amendment portion of this motion before us right now.
Thank you, Mayor Creasy. The motion on the floor by Councillor Hoekstra is that council amends bylaw 400.53 by replacing and adding text in section 9.14.2 prior to second reading as follows. Minimum front yard, 4.0 meters or 6.0 meters where the parcel is on a collector road or front parking is proposed. Minimum side yard, 1.25 meters or 2.4 meters where the property abuts a public roadway other than a lane, or 3 meters on one side on a laneless lot where no front garage exists. Minimum parcel area, interior parcel 330 meters square, corner parcel at 360 meters square.
Thank you. Councillor Hibbs.
Thank you, Mayor Creasy. I'd like to complicate things by making an amending motion to split that motion into separate motions so that the minimum front yard would be a separate motion from the minimum side yard and a separate motion to the minimum parcel area. if that makes sense, that each amendment category is its own motion.
Very good. Does anyone have any questions with respect to the amendment? Councillor Ross.
Thank you, Mayor Creasy. Sorry for clarification, but if one of these is defeated, does that defeat the whole second reading?
No, it does not.
Correct, but if one of the three is defeated, how does it make another motion to amend that part to carry it forward? Or, because for example, hypothetically, if 4 or 6 meters is defeated, but the other two are passed, there's still no decision on the minimum front yard. Is that not correct?
Fair point. I would suggest that if it is in fact failed, then it would revert to the existing numerical value of that particular setback or item, correct? Very good. And I think we're expecting quite a bit to have that latest amendment put in electronically. So we'll be doing and vote. So if we could, is our electronic participants still online? Good if we could just have IT bring him up on screen. Thank you very much. So we have before us an amendment to separate the categories of the proposed motion. Is that a fair summary, Councillor Hibbs? Very good. Everybody's clear what we're voting on the amendment then? Not seeing anyone suggesting otherwise. I would ask for a vote now. All those in favor of the amendment, hold your hand up now. And those opposed? That would be 4 are opposed and 3 are for. The item is therefore defeated. I think we'll have an additional item brought forward. See here that has been Coordinator Bellabono.
Sorry, Mayor Creasy. Can we just confirm what Councillor Scott's vote was for? I didn't catch it.
Verbally, you mean? Very good. I counted it as opposed, but
That's correct. It was opposed to the amendment motion.
thank you. My apologies for not doing that with our fancy system here. I kind of forget to list people that we have to vote. So we're clear with respect to the amendment. In opposition were Councillors Dallas, Councillor Hoekstra, Councillor Gullickson, and Mayor Creasy. Voting in favor naturally then were Councillors Clonic, Ross, and Hibbs. That can be recorded correctly. And the original motion, I believe, was brought forward by Councillor Hoekstra, and that is where we are at now. And no, we're not going to read it again unless somebody specifically wants it. I think that is up on our voting machines now, so please go ahead and vote. Oh. And that is passed. And there were, with a margin of 5-2, Voting against that item are Councillors Conick and Hibbs. Councillor Hoekstrom.
I'd like to make a motion that council gives second reading to bylaw 400.53 as amended.
Thank you. I'm just wondering if perhaps you didn't misspeak. Did you mean third reading? Second? Then don't mind me. My apologies. Any additional items for that consideration, anyone? Please go ahead and vote.
No, I'd
Oh,
like to speak to it.
Well, you just go right ahead.
Thank you, sir.
Councillor
I've
Hoekstrom.
been waiting to speak to this bylaw. Thank you. So just a question, you said there was 147 of these lots, but that is total throughout the whole city, not in addition to the 119. Is that correct?
That's correct. In
Okay.
the outline, the existing outline plans that Lacombe has, it's 147
Okay.
total.
May I continue with my question? So these changes that are proposed in these bylaws truly affect future outline plans or this current proposal in Mackenzie Ranch. Rather, like if there's one or two of these lots, it doesn't change the density in those areas. Am I understanding that correctly?
That's correct. So it's going to affect 30 some lots that are yet to be developed left in Mackenzie Ranch, but it would more so apply to future outline plans where the parcel areas are smaller. And as Ron had mentioned, he can design neighborhoods to a different standard with the smaller parcel areas and the reduced setbacks.
Okay, thank you. May I have one more? So I'd like to speak to the letter that came forward. I appreciate their concerns and we have heard their concerns. They live in a beautiful part of Lacombe, but will this bylaw truly affect any of the DARP region of Lacombe?
It is likely not to affect the DARP region.
C.A. Gowdy.
Thank you. I did want to just make sure that when Planner McLaughlin is saying there's 147 lots exist in Lacombe, they don't really exist or yet to be developed. They're not really yet to be developed because approximately 30 of them don't actually exist. They're just planned in the outline plan. So the 119 lots, those are subdivided, zoned, they titled lots. The other 30 are in non-statutory plans for how that development ought to look when it's developed out. So they are not real existing lots today that are going to be affected by these changes directly. They're all to be subdivided, to be rezoned lots.
Anyone else? Then for consideration of second reading. Councillor Hibbs.
Thank you, Mayor Creasy. Just a question, and this is in reference to something that the developer mentioned, only because it deviates in practice from what are lots that are currently developed as R1N. So the developer said, and I appreciate this, I would like to see this, where if an area is developed in this style and they were to have front garages, they would all have front garages. Or if they were designed so that there was no front garages, they would all not have front garages, and that setback would be the same. Only mentioning this because in areas that are existing with this designation, that isn't a control. So you have streets that are back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. So my question is, would that actually be a requirement in the bylaw, or is that just something that the developer may choose to do? So that would be my question. Are we requiring that to be the case, that all of the houses would be developed in a uniform manner with the exact same setback all the way down, or is that left up to the discretion of the developer? or developers in some cases.
So we'll give our planner and our manager a moment to confer. I'm going to go out on a limb here and suggest that no, that is not a requirement of the City of Lacombe Planning Department. That was a suggestion for the setbacks. I didn't take it to mean whether or not if one property has a garage, they all will. I heard that the setbacks will be similar on a given street, not whether or not they had a garage or not. That's what I recall. Planner McLaughlin?
So the way that the bylaw is written is that it would be 4 or 6 meters. So you could have, if it wasn't controlled by the developer, you could have 4, 6, 4, 4, 6, 4. Like it could be all over the place the way the bylaw is currently written. So it would be the developer deciding if they were doing 4 or 6 meters with front attached garages. And I'm not certain that there's a way to write it into the land use bylaw specifically to control a street having 4 and a street having 6, because you would get really detailed in saying on this block and plan you have 4, and on this block and plan you have 6. So that is mostly controlled by the developer, but certainly could be written into future outline plans that the developer would then have to comply with, more detailed in that outline plan when they're subdividing.
Which would be rather unusual given that these are minimums.
I would say yes, that's correct.
Thank you. Councillor Connick.
Thank you, Mayor Christie. Sorry, I don't want to beat a dead horse or anything. I'm not disputing parking is not an issue throughout the whole city, whether it's an R1N or R1 anywhere. I get that. All I'm saying is that it's a lot easier to park 2 pickup trucks in front of an R1 than it is an R1N, and then you start to shrink it even further. That's all. So this vote is preordained, but I just wanted to say that. That's all.
That may be a consideration for future development to have areas for parking with families with 4 or more vehicles. Just a thought. This was Cora. So with respect to Councillor Hoekstra's motion for second reading, are there any additional questions? Line, we're okay, good? Line, we're okay, very good. Seeing none, please go ahead and vote. That second reading is passed by a margin of 5-2. Councillors Connick and Hibbs in opposition. Thanks, everyone. Councillor Hoekstra.
Thanks, Mayor Creasy. I'm on a roll. That I'd like to move that council give third reading to bylaw 400.53 as amended.
Thank you. Sorry for the side chatter. I think that both myself and Councillor Connick were thrown a little bit with the motion for the previous to second reading, having it in our mind that in fact that was second reading. So for third and final reading, are there any further comments or concerns? Please proceed to vote. We have a consistent outcome with this as well. This is passed by a margin of 5-2. Councillors Connick and Hibbs in opposition. Thank you, everyone. So I believe that leaves us with just the in-camera items. I'm sorry, Councillor Ross? No. Councillor Konik,
Motion going.
thank you. Record will show it's 7:17. Please go ahead and vote. It is unanimous. When IT has informed us, it will be in camera.